Hello, 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 hello. Thank you all for coming. Welcome. This is the first lecture in the North Seattle College Art Gallery's 21-22 Visiting Artist Lecture Series. I'm Amanda Knowles, the coordinator of the North Seattle College Art Gallery and printmaking and drawing instructor in the art department at North Seattle College. I'm pleased to work with Karen Stuhldreher, who assists in the gallery. She'll be working hard here behind the scenes, and I want to appreciate her and all of the work she does for the gallery. So we have live transcript available for those of you who want it. Those of you who don't want it or find it distracting, you can turn it off by clicking the button at the bottom of your Zoom screen and selecting Hide Subtitle. So that's the live transcript button. Use it if you wish, hide it if you wish, but we want to make sure that we have it for those who need it. So I am going to begin this lecture with some acknowledgements. All right, so first is our land acknowledgement. North Seattle College acknowledges that we occupy the former lands of the Coast Salish people, the descendants of the first people of this region. We recognize their longstanding stewardship of this land and that their cultures endure as a valued part of our modern society. We encourage participants to consider their responsibilities to the people and land, both here and elsewhere, and to stand in solidarity with Native, Indigenous, and First Nation people and their sovereignty, cultural heritage, and lives. We also want to do a labor acknowledgement. We also pause to recognize and acknowledge the labor that created the United States and from which we all benefit. We remember that our nation is built on the labor of enslaved people who were forcibly brought to the US from the African continent, and we recognize the continued contribution of their survivors. We acknowledge immigrant labor and recognize that voluntary forced and prison labor contribute to the building and maintenance of our nation. We acknowledge all unpaid caregiving labor. Additionally, we acknowledge the critical importance of the work towards racial equity that continues across this country in response to racial injustice and generations of structural racism against BIPOC communities. And also, this next slide shows that what we're doing as we continue to work to go from acknowledgement to deed. It is not enough to just acknowledge the land and labor. We have to be sure that we are taking action. We show you here what actions North Seattle College and the NSC Art Department are taking to support BIPOC individuals and institutions and to be held accountable. We recommend Real Rent Duwamish, and I put that in the chat. I hope that we can put it again in the chat, the link for Real Rent Duwamish for you to explore. Thank you. As we are not yet mounting shows in the art gallery, we have a plan to be back in winter quarter 2022. That's the plan. We're working hard to be able to find ways to interact with artists and continue to have them come out to talk with us and show us what they're working on. Today is the first lecture of the fall quarter. We have lectures every other Monday at noon. The next lecture will be Lisa Myers-Bullmash on Monday, October 25th. I urge you to visit our website for links to recordings of last year's lectures and the list of upcoming visiting artists. We will put our links in the chat. And now we get to go to the real reason we are here. What a pleasure it is to introduce you to Fox Anthony Spears. Fox is an enrolled member of the Carrick tribe. The Carrick are indigenous people of California and one of the largest tribes in California. Fox is a Pacific Northwest-based artist who has used the geometric patterns of Carrick basket patterns as a basis for his work. Fox graduated magna cum laude with a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree from Cornish College of the Arts. He has participated in Artist Trust Edge development program for visual artists. He was a part of the Institute of American Indian Arts Native Eyes distance learning program and did a summer session in public art at Pilchuck Glass School. Fox and his artwork have been presented with many honors. Just to name a few, they include 2 National Native Creative Development Grants, an Artist in Business Leadership Fellowship through the First Peoples Fund, a Native Artist Grant through the Potlatch Fund, and the Edwin T. Pratt Scholarship at Pratt Fine Arts Center. Last year, he held a Working for Generations Artwork Commission. His work has been highlighted in several group and solo exhibitions, including a recent show at the Confluence Gallery in Twisp, Washington, entitled Hooves, Hearts, and Fairy Tales. His work was included in the Yaha show at King Street Station, as well as at Seattle Art Museum's Community Gallery, and he was a Yaha Indigenous Artist in Residence at the Seattle Public Library. His work has also been included in exhibitions at Crow's Shadow Institute of the Arts in Pendleton, Oregon, the Museum of Northwest Art in Lackawanna, Washington, Columbia City Gallery, Ballard Works, and so many others. I just learned this morning that he has been working with Starbucks as well as with Facebook. So lots of really great things going on in the art world of Fox Spears. I will be handing you over to Fox, but before I do, I want to let the audience know that we will be taking questions from the chat today. So if questions or comments arise during the talk, please write them in the chat and we will hopefully get to each and every one of them. We will be sending a transcript of the chat to Fox after the talk. So if you want to comment on the work and his words, please do. You might be specific about what you're commenting on, as Fox will be busy talking and we'll see your words after the talk, but I urge you to support him and his work in the chat. Thank you so much for coming to speak with us, Fox, and welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here, so thank you for asking me. And thank you everyone who's joining us. Today, I saw a couple folks that I recognize their names. So hello to everyone I know and hello to everyone I do not know yet. My name is Fox Spears, obviously. Well, I have a bunch of slides to share, so some will go fast, but I kind of wanted to share a lot. Since a lot of my 2D visual work is really inspired by basketry designs, I wanted to start with an image of some cork basketry. This is an image by Edward Curtis. I think it's from 1924, but it shows a collection of cork baskets. You can see there's some open weave, a variety of sizes. There's actually a couple of basket hats there. I have another one showing some basket hats, but just to kind of give a sense, there's a lot of different types of designs, but they tend to be fairly geometric, lots of triangles. I'm totally a fan of triangles. That gives a little bit of a sense. Since today's Indigenous Peoples Day, also I had to throw this one in. This is something I did back in school for Cornish, but because I shared an Edward Curtis image, I kind of was thinking about this and thought I'd throw it in. This is just something I'd made for a class. It was a printmaking class, but I did this digitally. So I had taken a lot of images of portraits that Edward Curtis had taken, which is of course what he's well known for, as well as a self-portrait of him, and kind of created a flag. I was calling it Flag for a Vanished Race. And for the white stripes, I had actually taken a photo of my skin and then kind of modified it. So don't need to dwell on this one too much, but Edward Curtis, lots of feelings. But baskets. So here's just some more images of baskets. These are basketry hats. And I think this kind of shows the tones and colors that usually the baskets have. They're made from a variety of materials: bear grass, roots, dyed with alder. There's other materials that I'm totally blanking on that I can't think of. I have never personally made a basket, maybe at some point, but these were items that people would spend a long time working on, from gathering the materials, processing the materials. Definitely a lot of time was invested in these. So I thought I'd start with something simple. These are, I think, from 2010, so they're kind of among my earliest prints. I graduated from Cornish in 2010, and I'd say I kind of feel like I've been a working artist, like I've been working and showing actively since around 2009, 2010. Most of that time, I've done a lot of my printmaking at Crow's Shadow Institute, which is on the Umatilla, or the Confederated Tribes of Umatilla Reservation outside of Pendleton, Oregon. These, I think, are really simple. They're kind of some of my earlier pieces I was doing where I was really looking at the shapes more individually. These are not prints. So these are actually a series of 4 pieces that I did based on the 4 seasons. I'm realizing now that they're a little out of order, but from left to right, there's winter, then summer, then fall, and then spring. And these, I'll go to the next one just so you can see a little better. These were actually color pencil and ink. And then each one has a piece that I cut out of paper and stitched onto it with gold ink over it as well. So I just shared I think this is 2013. These were for a show down at Humboldt State University. Most of what I do tends to be, more abstract and isn't necessarily representative of an actual person or place or animal, but occasionally I do. These I think are from 2015, and I forget if I even had a title for these, but what I tend to do with my process is I'll cut out stencils. So you can see the repeating pattern of the crows. That was kind of the central images that I was thinking about. Some of the background images, I think some of those were actually from older stencils from past things I had done, or I may cut out little things to use. This series I have, I don't know, 25 different ones in different colorways, different, the crows can flip depending on what I was doing with the stencils. But I think this was kind of gives an idea of how some of my work, like I will often create a series, so it's maybe inspired by a single thing, but then I create multiple works that are sort of different iterations. It's kind of a monotype with stencil process that I do. So each one is unique. I'm not really creating editions of the same image. There may be some that are similar, but each one is going to be unique and kind of one of a kind. This was from 2015. This one's pretty popular. This one I do have a title. What did I call it? Poop or Fog in Kuruk. This was actually a collaboration. So there's a group of artists that have gone down. A lot of us are frequently there at Crow's Shadow. We originally started going down for 4-day long weekend workshops offered through Pacific Northwest College of Art in Portland. And then a group of us ended up getting together and would start renting time on our own as well outside of that. So one of the artists from that group, Ahuva Zalewski, was creating these big rainbow rolls for some work she was doing, where it kind of goes from white to this really dark blue. And she made a couple backgrounds, and then I was layering some of my designs on it. I used a silver ink on this one. So this one, I'm trying to think, I've made a few things, like had it printed onto some products, I think some leather purses and things that it turned out really nicely. So just thinking about like what I do in terms of what I'm inspired by and how it becomes a piece. This is a Kuruk cooking basket, and I'll usually kind of look through, I have a few books and some other sources. I do own a couple of baskets myself as well, but I'll look for something that sparks my interest. And this piece, it's fairly simple as far as the repeating triangle design, but I knew it was something I wanted to work with. I think there is also something where it's nice to see the pattern on the basket, because of course the basket is a 3D object. It's round, it's curved, it's not a flat piece of paper. So I do have to sometimes think about that if I'm translating it, but usually with the geometric nature of these, it's not too difficult to do. So I had created a series. I feel like there were maybe 30 prints in the series. These are just 3 of them. But you can see where I was inspired by that repeating triangle pattern and how I ended up using a stencil that has that. Like I like to juxtapose organic natural shapes along with the geometric shapes. In my mind, I sort of think of the organic shapes as referencing landscape. Oftentimes I'm thinking about a river, clouds, mountains, things like that. Sometimes I'm actively trying to create some sort of image of something with the naturalistic and or organic shapes. Sometimes I'm just sort of laying it down and seeing what shows up. So I think like the one on the left there with the red and it has that piece going through, I probably most likely was actually thinking about a river when I was placing that one. The other ones, I think they just probably ended up because they're lighter, like they feel like clouds to me. But I'm always fascinated to hear what other people see in my work too, or what they think. I have a lot of times people have told me it reminds them of quilting, which I can see a lot of the geometric similarities and from those works, triangles for sure. But I think this also kind of shows how you know, like these are all from the same series. They were all using the same mix of stencils. And for the more organic pieces, I'm usually tearing newsprint and kind of masking things off. So those can vary a lot more. But I think it shows sort of the variation that can come based on, you know, how much ink is on the plate, how I have things placed or repositioned. So they can feel very different. I think I have, yes, I do have more. Here's a couple more. These are just two that are shown next to each other. I'm really always fascinated by what will happen. I think that's one thing that I'm drawn to printmaking because of it's got this sort of sense of mystery with it. And, you know, I tend not to plan too closely what I'm trying to achieve. I'll usually go in thinking about, you know, this is maybe the pattern I want to work with. These are some other shapes, perhaps. These are the colors of ink I'm thinking of using. And then it's, you know, also a little bit of just playing and seeing what comes up. These ones definitely, like the red ink is looking almost pink there. So I like to take the plates and really keep using them, get as many ghost impressions off of them as I can, and, you know, increase the pressure. That's just, if there's ink on the plate, I'll still run it through. I think I have one more, yeah, and there's a couple more from that series. And again, you're just kind of seeing, so you know, it's this really bright red ink, and it was, you know, definitely a darker blue too, but I feel like kind of contrasting different levels, you know, so if I have something that's really pale, well, then it definitely needs something bolder and brighter usually as well. And I think this one, I used 3 ink colors, so there's probably kind of a beigey color in the background, which is probably an ink that I found. I like to use the inks that are mixed, that they've, you know, from artists that they've had who are doing residencies or other artists who may have been in there creating things. And then the red is probably flame red, which is my favorite. And it's probably a mixed blue that I found as well. But I just really love the variation that can come off of all these.
Can I interrupt for a second? Not to get really deep down in there, and probably most people know what it is, but can you just explain what ghost impressions are, just so that most people can?
Absolutely, that's a good question. So, you know, if I have a plate inked up, and I think I have an image of one farther in where I can talk about it a little more. But if I've inked up a plate that I'm going to run through the press, you know, the first run, it's fresh ink. That's kind of usually what people are going for. Once it's been run through the press and, you know, ink has been transferred from the plate or the matrix to the paper, there's usually still ink left on the plate or the matrix. And so running it through again without modifying it is pulling a ghost image off of the plate, if that makes sense. And so this is actually using the stencil that I've made for those other ones I was showing. And I think I happen to have some, this is like a handmade cotton paper from India. I had some, I was like, oh, what am I gonna do with this? So I'd done a series with that stencil, using a stencil that I made that's reminiscent of a traditional cork pipe. And then there's a method that the former master printmaker at Crow Shadow, oh my gosh, I'm absolutely blanking on his name right now, which is awful. But he was doing things with smoke, so he had shown us all that. So I was like, oh, I want to do something with the smoke. So that's actually smoke matches that's on there as well. And our tribe had, tobacco is the one crop that we grew domestically. So it was definitely very important. I did do kind of a series of these. I think this one is number 3. But again, each one is a little different based on the placement, based on the smoke, based on other things. And for this, I think what I probably did, the stencil that I had cut out, I'll use different things. Most often I'm using Bristol paper. I just like the sharpness it can get. And I think if you saw some of the sharp lines around the imagery on some of them, like since it's raised, it kind of can leave that on there sometimes. If you don't know what I'm talking about, that's totally fine. So anyway, so I would have taken the stencil that had ink on it from being run through and then used it to create this on the paper. This is one from a series I did. So I created these at Crow's Shadow, and then I had taken these when I had the Yahoo residency at the Seattle Public Library. I had taken these with me and was adding some more on them. I was stitching onto them a little bit, I think doing a little bit of drawing. It was something where it was supposed to be inspired by water. So I was definitely thinking about water. Obviously in the center there, that shape is water inspired. It's the original path of the Duwamish River around the time, that's from a map from the 1850s when settlers first arrived here. So, you know, it had all these bends, all these curves, very organic. Now it's been straightened out. It's very different. And then for the background images, you know, I have this sort of little blue piece running through the center horizontally that I was thinking of a river, these sort of slanting lines. I was thinking about rain. You know, the other pieces, I think they kind of look mountainy. I don't remember if I was intentionally doing those or not as mountains, but you know, that's kind of the type of stuff I definitely do in my work a lot. I think I have okay, here we go. So this is just that same image zoomed in a little bit more. So you can see, I didn't do a ton of stitching on these, but you can see kind of like around the edge, there's some stitching up at the top and at the bottom. And I think this is probably in pencil around the sides. And then the other image there is showing the stencil that I'd cut out that I was using for that. And that was when it was placed. I have more images to kind of share my process a little. This was the image I'd found. I forget where exactly I found it, but I found it online. It was from a map that was showing these early claims. And some of the names are familiar, like this Maynard up there near the top, Georgetown. So anyway, if you're familiar with Seattle, some of the names are definitely familiar. My initial thought was to really kind of include these plots on. So I did one print that actually has the plots shown, which is over here as well. And I ended up not being that crazy about how it turned out and how it looked. And it was super fiddly with the process that I was doing with my stencils. But it was fun to do, but I was also like, okay, I don't think I actually need to do this on all of these. And I think you can see probably too on that one where, I mean, I'm noticing it now, like it shifted a little. I think I maybe was off a little on something, but I kind of find that, you know, if there's an error or I mess up and do something that I wasn't planned, I'm like, okay, well, that's part of this piece now. So I try to roll with it and see where it'll go from there. So I do have some process photos just to kind of talk about how I make things specific to that print at least. You've got all my little pieces of the little land claims down there in the 3 different colors I was using. So I'd rolled out the ink and then I placed them down in to ink them up that way, and then was setting them on the plates. It was extremely fussy. I don't recommend it unless you want to drive yourself crazy. Here's, I think again, I think I'd numbered them so I would know where they were laying. And then of course, since you're having to do everything in the reverse, it was, you know, just trying to remember where everything needed to be placed and how it was supposed to be placed. And then it's a plexiglass plate that I was working on. And I think these ones, it was definitely part of a larger template that they had available there. Let's see, lost my mouse, there it is. There it is just before I ran it through the press. So you can see the bigger template for the, I'm losing all my words. I can't even think of the word for it right now. And I think I just said it. But anyway, it's made of poster board, and then it has a spot where you can set the plate in it. There are marks on it, so you can always lay the paper down and kind of tape it in place. So it's not super exact for registration, but you can get it pretty close. And I do like to use these templates. They have a bunch of them for workshops and other things like that. So I find it fun to work on those a lot. And then this is kind of showing how it looked on the plate probably before I ran it through, maybe after, well, I'm sure things were sticking to the paper after, so it's probably beforehand. And then there it is right after it come off the press too. So that kind of shows a little bit. So, you know, if this was likely the first run, it could have been a ghost because they are looking a little hard to remember now. But like these ones down on the paper, you know, if you run it through once and then you run it through a second time, the second one will be a ghost, or any ones after that. And then this is the bigger background that I had made, the stencil. And this, I usually use Bristol, but I think this one I was using vellum. And The vellum was interesting because eventually it started to, like, some of the ink would kind of work its way through. So it kind of gave a little bit of a grainy texture on a few of them. So there's the bigger plate. You can see this has been run through a few times at least, but like if I were to take this and run it through, that would be a ghost. But you can see, yeah, see I have that strip. So I have the center part where I had drawn out where the river portion was going to be. And then I think I had miscalculated. So that's where there's two lines on there vertically on one side where I had to correct myself after a first run had gone through. You can see I'll mask those strips that are vertical there. Those are just torn out of newsprint. So I use those a lot. I probably was running something else that had already gone through over it. So it has ink on the back side of those strips there from a previous print. But like I like to lift, again, as much ink off as I can. Like even if I have a thought of what I'm doing, I'll still be like, there's ink on there. I'll just grab a fresh sheet of paper and run it through and save it for something else, because you never know. This was just an image in the library space, the gallery space there, of a lot of those hanging up. There were a couple other artists who had residencies as well. So I think those are from Native Cut in the case in front. Oh, that's right. And there was I had a little display as well. So there's just a couple baskets I have and some books and a necklace and a drum, some other pieces. Okay, so this is from another series. Let's see, this is Horse Blanket 1, I believe. And I had done a series with this stencil, so the repeating pattern in the background. There are a whole bunch, and they kind of all look fairly different. I really liked how this one turned out. I think the challenge I find sometimes is that I'll love how something turned out, but it can be difficult to replicate it. So I, will try to think about what materials I was using, like the pressure, maybe the order I was layering things in. But I'm trying to remember how I got all that graininess, and off the top of my head, I don't know. This is, again, part of that same series. I don't believe this one has a title. I really liked this pattern in the back, and I didn't discover it until later, but when I was making it, I did actually make an error. So there's one of the triangles that's like, it should be centered on the trapezoid, and it's shifted over a little bit, which I didn't catch until months after I'd made them when I was looking at a print, and I'm like, wait a minute, I messed up on my stencil. But it's, it's part of the work now. So it doesn't bother me. I don't beat myself up about it. Here's another one. I did really like kind of the moodiness. I think this was a ghost of a really light blue that went over it, and then I had laid some other stencils or triangle shapes over it. And then this one, I have a couple of these. This one you can probably see the triangle that's off the most, or it's the easiest to see. But I really love this one. I just felt like the colors worked really well together. I will also use, whatever, I like to use whatever's available. So this, I think, was on a cream paper. Maybe one of the other ones was on tan or gray. I think that can be frustrating for me sometimes when I really like how something looks and I'm trying to remember exactly, well, how can I recreate that again? And it's like, oh, it was a different paper color and I didn't even realize that. But it's fun. I'll use them interchangeably. These are some other prints. Let's see, and those last ones I think were from 2017. No, sorry, 2018. These are also, these might be 2019. I had gone down to Crow's Shadow, and then this was just for their monophone. So I think I literally drove down in the morning and then drove back that same day. It's like a 5-hour drive. But I was really, really, really wanting to go, and I don't think I was able to go to a long workshop that year. And so these are kind of faster. There's a lot more, paper showing through, but they were kind of fun. This is from a series. I have a few. I think they're called Hummingbird's Journey. And actually one's in the City of Bellevue's public art collection. They purchased one last year. So Ghosts. So this one, this is where, like, if I have leftover ink and I'm like, there's usable stuff on there, I'll just go ahead and run an extra sheet of paper through. So this one I probably had run the blue through, is my guess, or it could have been the red. I don't remember the order, but there's only 2 passes through, and both were ghosts where I was like, there's still ink on here. And then I had this, it was sitting around. I was like, what am I going to do with this? And I ended up stitching. So I just took embroidery thread and stitched the pattern that was missing from where in the previous series I was doing sort of that Duwamish River and Elliott Bay section. I just continued the pattern with stitching. And this was shown in the Yahoo show at King Street Station. I've never been really big into needlecraft in much that I've done, but I think I was realizing that I still am fascinated by stitching or how you fix things together still. So that's been something I do from time to time. So this was a mural that I did in Oak Harbor for All Gear Project. And it's on this one wall of this building. There was a lovely mural of clogs nearby. So the top left corner, they were leaving open as a place to project movies or other things like that. And there's the work a little more finished. Since it was inspired from that roundup print that I did, it still has the triangle that's off a little bit from the other ones. This was really fun. It was the first mural I'd worked on, and the owner of the space has brought in a bunch of artists to create different murals. They had brought in overall creative to help sort of coordinate all of that. So I'd worked with them for the first time there, and then I worked with them this year on something. Oh, so you've seen a lot of printmaking. Now we'll do a little bit of painting. So you saw that mural. This is a piece I did last summer for Wells Fargo as part of their Working for Generations initiative. They had chosen 5 Native artists to create work that could be used for card designs. So that's the original painting. Oh, and there's the painting, and shown was kind of like a small thing of what the card looks like. This was inspired, let's see, there was a basketry cap, and the design, I saw the design called a couple different things, but the one that caught me the most was one where an artist had done it, and it was called People Sitting Around a Fire. And I just kind of thought about people coming together, people working together. I really wanted something that would be simple and would be able to visually translate well when it was, on a tiny little card. And I wanted it to be really bright and colorful. I liked the idea of people carrying a little bit of joy around with them in their wallet or purse. So that's where that came from. This is a painting I did for the Hooves, Hearts, and Fairy Tales show at Confluence Gallery and Twist. There's the actual one. So again, I usually don't do too much that's representative. That's probably not the word I want either, but that's like an actual thing. But one of the curators for this had asked me if I would be willing to submit a piece. And I was like, well, what am I going to make? I don't know. And I was really ended up thinking about the white deerskin dances that my tribe and others on the Klamath River do. And so I just was like, I need to paint a white deer, and threw a little bit of triangles and geometry in there. But I really love this one. And then, so traditional Kuruk drums are square, which I have not really run across any other Native cultures in the US outside of, our little area on the Klamath River in Northern California that use square drums. Doesn't mean there aren't others that do, but there's kind of a traditional one there on the left. On the right is a watercolor and pen, gosh, I forget, that I had done of a drum that I was wanting to make. I probably did this actually after I made the drum itself, now that I think about it. And I think the owner of this, Byron, is with us today as well. I saw them. So what I was really thinking about was, I've been kind of thinking about this. This is probably the first piece I made, but I've been thinking about a project ongoing that in my head I'm calling Designer Regalia. And it's just really thinking about, for Kuruk culture, wealth was something that was very important. The accumulation of wealth, the display of wealth, that's how you were known as the good people. It's something that I think about a lot with, contemporary consumerism and what what luxury goods mean now versus what they did then. I certainly can't go out and collect a lot of woodpecker scalps or things like that nowadays. But anyway, I'm fascinated by this. I think about this stuff a lot. So I was thinking about, well, what could I do? What could I make? I'd gotten an older Louis Vuitton bag off of eBay. I'd ended up cutting it up. There's my cat sitting there assisting. And it was kind of fascinating because I remember thinking while I was cutting this up too, I'm like, it's like I've hunted this thing down and now I'm like taking it apart for its pieces. And it's like my people use all of the bag. So I was like, I don't know, I have all these scraps and things still. There's two of the drum frames you can see there off to the left, cedar. And here's the final piece. So this was really fun to make. I just made one. I have the pieces and parts to make the second one. I thought I was going to do that this summer and I have not. So maybe it'll be a winter project or fall winter project. But this one I used the straps as a carrying handle for it. The other one I would use the shoulder strap to attach it on as far as carrying it around. It has, let's see, so it's an elk rawhide, which I did purchase like a gigantic elk rawhide. That was kind of fascinating to work with. There are some shells. I think there's some abalone. I forget if there are other things. Maybe it's just abalone on it as well. Yeah, I think so. It sounded really nice too. I was really, really pleasantly surprised that it not only looks like a cool piece, but it, is extremely functional too. It's down at Stonington Gallery right now. And there's just another image. Yeah, you can see some of the abalone beads in there a little more closely. Oh, and another view. So let's see. These are pieces. So I did go down to Crochetto twice last fall, once in September, once in October. And it was interesting. I'm realizing I don't think I have any images of the small prints. I made like, I don't know, maybe 40. I have about 40 smaller size prints that are like on 11 by 15 paper. And then these ones are 22 by 30. And I think I only showed the larger ones. But I had gone down the first time. I think I'd started all of these and I left and came home and I didn't have anything that felt finished. And I was so frustrated by that. Like, no, I have to have something finished. And so I'd gone back again and then kind of finished them to where I was happy with them. But, we'd had all that smoke. I remember when I drove down the first time, it was just so smoky driving through Eastern Washington. And so that was kind of on my mind a lot. I think that's where this smoky gray sort of thing going on came from. The triangles and the designs on these are Chine Coulee, and they're Hermes, the luxury brand Hermes. I guess these are also part of that designer regalia thing. Placemats and wrapping paper made by Hermes that I tore out and then Chine Coulee'd on and then was printing up under and over them. And I think there were, I don't know, maybe 8 of those. I liked the horses that were in there. And then this one I made literally the night I was leaving. So this one, I'm trying to remember what I did. I'm excited to go back this year because I'm like, oh, I need to do some more like this. So let's see, this was when I was leaving, it was around Halloween and there was a full moon on Halloween. And I was wanting to just make some little prints that were kind of inspired by the full moon. So I'd taken a sheet, torn it up into smaller pieces and was just going to make a series of small ones with kind of maybe mountains or things. They ended up being really inky and juicy. So then I ended up taking all the little prints I'd made and placed them on a clean sheet of paper and ran that through and got this. And then I added the yellow strips as well. But I think that's where, I never know what's going to happen. I really do love to play. And sometimes things are like, not sure about this, I'll set it aside. And sometimes things are really fun. And the Washington State Arts Commission bought it for a school in Des Moines recently. So this one I call Full Moon Blanket. Let's see. Oh, okay. This is the secret Starbucks project. I'd already shared this image on social media, so I felt like it was okay to use it here. It doesn't show the final works, but Starbucks Art Program has commissioned me to create a series of prints that they would have available for their store designers to use in the future. So I think they initially commissioned 5 prints, and I ended up making 24 because that's just kind of my process and how it goes. And they were like, maybe we'd want to buy an extra one to have a, an even number set. They ended up purchasing all of them, which was nice. But these were really fun. So I was really thinking about mountains and coffee and mountains and coffee growing regions. And I think you can get a sense of my process a little because like I had 6 distinct mountain shapes I was working with. Actually, let me think. These ones over here on the far left where I was just layering ghosts of things. So that one actually isn't part of the series. I could yammer on about these for a long time too. But I had a process I was following where like the ones on the bottom all have the first run of the mountain. The ones on the second row up from the top all have the first run of the whatever design I was using in the green ink, and then they were kind of ghosted from there. So it was just a way that I was able to kind of put them all up and really think about what I was making. These also, so I don't have my own print studio. When Starbucks commissioned these, I was like, how am I going to make these? But of course, yes, I'd love to work on this. And I ended up getting connected with Sheila Coppola from Sidereal Fine Art Fest in Tukwila. She was so lovely. She'd never really just rented her studio out before. And so we kind of talked a little, and like, okay, pandemic, how are things okay? She's like, let's meet. And, we talked on the phone, we met, and it seemed like it would work out okay. And she was so gracious, so wonderful, so lovely to help me out with this. Let's see. Okay, the Facebook project that I did, this was the space. It's a newer building in Bellevue. It's actually part of the complex where they have what's it called, the Spring Street district. There's a light rail stop, and I think it's where the REI headquarters were that they ended up selling or releasing, whatever they're doing with them. So this is the image I had. I was like, okay, I get to make something in here. What am I going to do? I was really thinking about that yellow wall, and I was like, I want to leave it. And so this I'm going to kind of show some of my process because I always think that's interesting. So initially, this was kind of the concept I'd come up with. I was thinking about creating like standalone pieces that were made from, there was going to be some beadwork, fabric, maybe some printed stuff. I don't know. I think I had leather in there or rawhide. And I was going to leave the yellow wall. And then this other wall, I was thinking I could either do an image of bark, or there's actually like bark tiles you could get. And like maybe I'll tile the whole wall in bark. I love the idea. Once I actually physically got in to see the space, I was like, oh, this area is darker than I thought. I don't think this is the right thing. So I ended up going to something different. These images probably look a little familiar. They were pulled from a series of prints I did back in 2017, I think. So I kind of was using those for inspiration. This was up on the 11th floor. So they also had, there were some offices, but there was also the cafe. So I was thinking about the cafe being there. The repeating triangle design from the cooking basket made sense to me to use. And then, and I really loved the color palette from these two. So that's also what drew me to this. And then from the windows on each side of the building, so the room that's behind this wall and the windows on the cafe on the other side, you could see mountains. Actually, I think I probably have. This was just a study that I was kind of thinking about placing stuff, but it's not that exciting really. This was my final artwork for my proposal. I really was struggling though, like how is this going to look? How exact do I have to be about it? Like these colors aren't quite working the right way I want them to in Photoshop. So that was kind of, so you can see the images on each side down there. You probably can't see the mountains super well, but you can see the Olympics from one side of the building. You can see the Cascades from the other. And mountains are always something I'm inspired by. So this is what I'd submitted, and I was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to make this? And I was like, do I want to project this on the wall and do it? Or, I was freaking out about it, like, how am I going to make this? I was really happy that I had enlisted some help. Lena Cholwinski from Overall Creative, they had done the mural I'd worked on previously, so I reached out to them. Lena helped me. She was amazing. So I really ended up not going off of my design specifically, but using it as inspiration. So I chose my paint colors, and I really approached this like I would do my printmaking, I would say. I chose my colors, I had my general design, I knew what my template of the geometric pattern was going to be. And I was like, okay, and now I'm in the space and I just have to go. So I put down the sort of, what was that color called? Jersey cream, I think, for the paint there. Trying to remember exactly, I did mask things off, but I don't remember if I tore tape or exactly what I did for those. But I did like the cream backgrounds, and then I was doing these other pinks and blues, and it was really just mixing the red was real red, and then the blue was indigo, and mixing them with the Jersey cream a little bit. So it was just those three colors mixing in different ways to kind of get these different tonal values. And then once I had the big flat layers on, and then in this picture, I'm starting to put in some of these more textural pieces. Excuse me. And I had torn, I think it's Bristol, I don't know, torn paper, and was using that as sort of a template guide for the top half as I was going. And then I was just sort of painting it on. That's probably one you can see a little bit better. It was definitely nerve-wracking, like starting to paint. I'm like, oh, I can't take it back once I start putting stuff down. But it was super fun. I had a blast. And I really loved seeing how the piece developed. And, it certainly is a little bit different from the proposal, but I felt like it kind of had still the general spirit of what I was trying to do. And I think it turned out much better than the proposal anyhow. So it had these beaded components on the triangles. I have never beaded before, but I really was wanting to work with beadwork. And I was thinking, oh, well, if I use bigger beads, those will be easier, right? And I don't know that was really the right call either, or maybe it was easier, because I don't think it necessarily was. But it was really fun. Learned a lot. You can see those are Lena's hands over on the left there. I made a necklace that she's wearing as a bracelet. They're just really big glass pony beads. I think they're from India. And I used 4 different colors kind of repeating around. They were stitched onto felt strips. And then some of the triangles have those. Here's where we're installing the triangles. Again, Lena was such a help. I could have done this by myself, but it would have been a much bigger struggle. She had a guideline thing that was putting up like a grid and taped things off, and it was great. You can see also the strips of felt are attached. So we attached them onto the triangles, and then I glued them down finally once things were up on the wall too, because we had to attach the triangles to the wall. They're kind of hanging off there a little bit. There's the final piece. There's one view. And there's another view. I may have one more view, I'm not sure. But you can see, like, I have the line of triangles alone on the larger wall going in the one direction, which is really like, this is right as you come off the elevator lobby into this space. So I angled them that way, just, that's directionally where you would go. You can't really go to the left. There's a little unisex restroom, but otherwise nowhere to go. This was a super fun project to work on. And I loved how it turned out. And I don't know, I don't have a lot to say. I just really was following, I think trying to relate and follow the process that I usually do for my printmaking. I think that was what helped this be so successful. Okay, a few more things. So I do have a project going on right now that I can't really share the imagery for, but the Kraken and One Roof Foundation, I'm working on some designs for warm-up jerseys. There's a few artists that are doing different things for them. And so my theme is Indigenous, but it's inspired by this print shown here on the left. And then on the right are a couple of backgrounds that I've done. I think these are probably after I modified them digitally, but I'd gone into Sheila Coppola's studio again, made some of these backgrounds, and then I sort of worked on it digitally to complete. So I'm excited. Should be super fun to share. That should be coming out this winter, hopefully. And the last thing, I think this is my last one probably, this is from last month. So this is just, an older print that I had that I liked, and these are probably ghosts that I was taking of things, but it never really felt finished. So Sheila had done a workshop with Lou Cabine, I believe, fiber artist. And they were just doing a little workshop in her yard where people could come and stitch. So I was like, sure, I'll come and stitch. And I was working on this and started stitching again. So I've been sewing onto some of my prints again I really loved how this turned out. I felt like, even though it was so simple, just adding the stitching gave it a little more texture and kind of defined it. So is that my last one? That was my last one. That's it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So great.
Thank you.
Yeah. There are a bunch of questions, and so I'm going to ask those. I'm going to sort of start from the top where I was taking note of things. The first thing is actually a comment from Jane Harradine. I love that language, laying it down and seeing what shows up. So open to process and what it can bring to the artist's work of choosing. Really nice. So some of the brighter colors people were asking, Karen actually asked, what might have inspired you to use those brighter colors? I mean, color is just such an interesting, we could talk all day about why, but like, was there something that those really bright pinks and all of that, why did that come up? Do you know?
Yeah, I'd say red is the ink color that I use almost every time I'm printing. And that really comes from traditional things like the red woodpecker scalps, or the few, let's see, when I was in school, I was able to do, I forget what it was exactly, but I was able to do something where I was able to go to the National Museum of the American Indian and do some research in their collections. And the Karuk items that they had, there was one set of things that were painted. There may have been some other painted things, but not a ton. But red and blue were really the two colors that were used on those the most. And so red and blue was kind of, they're things I go back to all the time. I use them a lot. I think the pinks oftentimes come from the red, and especially with printmaking and kind of getting it, where there's less ink. Yeah, I hardly ever use green. I'll just say that.
Right. Yeah. That's also a really hard color, isn't it?
I love it, but yeah, hard to work with.
Yeah. And you're always trying to like think about, the trees do it better. Like, right.
They do.
So Ariana asks this question, and she sort of broached it this way. It's making me very anxious to ask this question, so I'm just going to ask it. Big fashion is sometimes culpable of taking indigenous aesthetics and symbols and turning them into high fashion attire. Do you think that Louis Vuitton might come after you for using their signature imprint and making something completely different from it? Or maybe they'll offer you a commission for amplifying and reimagining their image.
Well, I have yet to hear from Louis Vuitton, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I don't know. I think that's a good question. And I wasn't really too worried about them and what they would do, because I think I took a used piece and certainly reworked it enough that it's not derivative of something that they manufacture, or, I don't think anyone's going to be like, oh, Louis Vuitton made a drum. And I think that monogram print on the canvas is really iconic, and I've definitely seen other artists use it. There's actually Kent Monkman, and I'm blanking, he's First Nations in Canada, and he has an alter ego called Mischief that he does, where he dresses in drag. And I remember he had made, I think it was a birch bark quiver to hold arrows that had like a Louis Vuitton print, and it probably was the Murakami colors, where it was white with the different colors on it. There's another native designer, I'm blanking on her name, I've seen her work with Louis Vuitton prints. Yeah, I think there's a lot there. I think they do certainly, these fashion houses do sometimes take things and appropriate them. I think even the best collaborations, there can be tension. Christy Belcourt had done, she does these amazing paintings that are inspired by Matisse beadwork, I believe. And she had done a collaboration with Valentina where they used some of her work for prints on dresses that were beautiful. But, I think a few seasons later, Valentina did something that was a little insensitive, and she's like, oh, why are they doing this? I can't believe it. I think there's always going to be some tension there. And, I think it's fun to see how artists react. I think whether it's doing it as like, well, this is an expensive thing, so I'm going to incorporate it in, or if it's sort of as having a comment about it. I mean, for the drum, part of me was thinking about, well, how do I meld these two things, or like, how do I meld these two different aspects of thinking about and looking at and having wealth? Part of me was also thinking about, like, I don't know, maybe it's a dystopian future and someone just found this bag and like, great, we'll turn this into this piece. Who knows?
I loved the two things that you said in that section where you were talking about the display of wealth, and that it was actually a good thing, whereas today we're sort of try to like kind of, I don't know, it depends on who you are, right? But like you sort of tamp it down a little bit, but it shows that you're one of the good people. I like that.
Mhm. Well, I mean, I would say even like it's something I've thought about a lot with some of the collaborations or work that I've been commissioned to do over the last couple of years. Like, you know, having Wells Fargo commission something and having me do work for them. Like I didn't personally experience any, but a couple of the other artists who had made artwork for that project I did see them getting some flack for it on social media, you know, where people were like, well, Wells Fargo, you know, funds this or that. And I really had to think about how okay am I with that? You know, and I don't know. If I hadn't done that project, someone else would have. There's always going to be someone else who can step in. And I think it is important to, you know, I have to eat, I have to live, I need to purchase supplies to be able to create what I do. So, you know, I ultimately am okay with that, but I also absolutely understand anyone who wouldn't be or who feels otherwise, you know, like there's no one right way to think about this.
Yeah. And the other thing that you said at that time, which was absolutely beautiful, was, and my people use olive bag.
Mhm.
So good.
Definitely. No, none of the bag goes to waste.
Someone asked about how you find all your commissions, or you were saying before everybody came on a little bit about that. So you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I feel really, really lucky. I had, you know, I had my corporate day job for a long time. I ended up leaving it shortly after the pandemic started for a variety of reasons, burnout, et cetera, et cetera. I was working as a vendor for a company at Amazon, and it was very stressful. So I ended up leaving. Right after that, I ended up getting the Wells Fargo commission. That's something that someone approached me for. All of these bigger things that I've been doing recently, I have not applied for anything. They have sought me out. It felt really weird, but like really wonderful. But it's, you know, they've just sort of come to me at this point. And I've asked to find out, and I was like, well, where did you hear about me? How did you find out about me? And it's really just from having shown work in various places. I think the Starbucks folks, like the Your House show, they'd seen my work there. Oh gosh, I'm forgetting. Just different shows that I've shown work in, and sort of having that presence. So it's interesting because I spent a long time, you know, working, and it's like I wasn't working on my art all the time, but I was consistently creating stuff every year. And I made a point to try to show work in some way, somewhere, somehow every year. And I guess it sort of paid off, at least for the moment. So I'm really grateful. I don't know that this will keep going, but I'm very happy while it has.
Fabulous. I know you were one of our finalists for the mural on our campus, and we were really excited about the proposal that you put forward for that.
Oh, yeah, that was super fun. And I love what Paige did as well. Like, I think that was a good choice.
All of it would have been a good choice. So, but yeah, thank you for your work there. Yeah, I think that seems to be. Does anybody have questions to ask sort of with their voice? Jane.
So I'm interested in knowing, when you do a series of potential design elements for someone like Starbucks and their designers, what do they need to do? What does the law require? What do you ask of them in terms of crediting you for your contribution to whatever they create?
So what they're going to do with those, like the 6 final images that they selected, they will be part of a catalog that's available for store designers to use and reproduce as artworks, like framed artworks in the store. So they're not taking and modifying them, or, you know, blowing them up and doing different things. I was kind of uncertain about that too, and I'm like, are they going to do all sorts of different things with them? And I'd had to get clarification too, which I would have been fine with, but yes, that would have been complicated or could have been.
Thanks.
will you
Yeah.
stop screen sharing so we can see your face a little bit?
Oh, of course.
Thank you.
No problem.
Fantastic. Anybody else have questions? All right. Well, I will stop recording.